I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope. Psalm 135, NIV. Have you ever ended the day still praying, but feeling like nothing answered back? You whispered the words, you showed up again, and yet the silence remained. Tonight is not for people who stopped believing. It is for people who are still praying, but wondering why God feels quiet. There is a very specific kind of tiredness that comes from spiritual waiting. Not the kind that sleep fixes, the kind that comes from hoping again and again, without visible change. You are not numb. You are not faithless. You are simply worn from listening for a voice that hasn't spoken the way you expected. And that matters, because God listens differently than we imagine. Let me take you into a small, ordinary moment. The house is quiet. Lights dimmed. Your phone finally set aside. Your body slows down, but your heart doesn't. This is when the questions surface. Did I pray wrong? Did I misunderstand God? Am I waiting or being ignored? These questions don't come from rebellion. They come from longing. And longing is never offensive to God. Many people believe silence means distance, but Scripture and lived faith tell another story. Silence often means proximity. When God is loud, he directs. When God is quiet, he shapes. The night prayers passed down through generations were never rushed conversations. They were slow, surrendering moments where people learned to trust God without feedback, to rest without reassurance, to believe without proof. That kind of faith is not dramatic. It is deep. Here's the truth many people miss. God is not withholding answers to test your loyalty. He is forming your trust where answers would shortcut the work. Some things cannot be learned in daylight. They require stillness, and stillness often feels like silence. You may feel like your prayers are unfinished, but heaven does not measure prayer by how quickly it produces results. Prayer changes the one who stays, and tonight you stayed. There is a reason Jesus often withdrew to quiet places, not to escape people, but to listen without interruption. If the Son of God embraced silence, then silence is not rejection. It is space. Space where faith grows roots instead of expectations. So tonight, do not rush the quiet. Do not fill it with explanations or self-correction. Let God meet you where you are, not where you think you should be. If all you can offer is presence, that is enough, because God does not demand polished prayers. He responds to honest hearts. Here is your action for this night. Stop trying to hear answers. Start allowing yourself to be held. Release the pressure to feel something dramatic. Release the fear that silence means failure, and gently remind your soul, I am still praying. God is still working. Even here, that posture is faith. There is something deeply unsettling about praying into silence, not because you doubt God's power, but because you trust His voice, and you expected to hear it by now. Silence makes faithful people question themselves before they question God. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I didn't listen closely enough. Maybe this is my fault. But silence is not a verdict. It is a season. Think about how often God chose quiet moments to do His most personal work. Elijah did not hear God in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire. He heard Him in a gentle whisper, and whispers require closeness. If God were distant, He would shout. If He is near, He speaks softly. That changes how we understand silence. There is a small misunderstanding that slowly drains the heart. If God hasn't answered yet, then nothing is happening. But the prayers of the night were never meant to produce immediate movement. They were meant to produce alignment, a heart that could rest even before relief arrived, a soul that trusted God's presence more than His explanations. You are not stuck. You are being aligned. Let's slow this down. Silence is uncomfortable because it removes feedback. No confirmation, No reassurance, no sense of progress. And yet, this is exactly where trust deepens. Because trust that survives silence is no longer dependent on outcomes. It becomes relational. You are no longer trusting God for something. You are trusting God with yourself. That is a deeper place. Night prayer reveals what daytime noise hides. During the day, movement makes us feel productive. At night, stillness reveals what we are carrying. That is why unanswered prayers feel heavier after dark. But here is the grace of this moment. God does not ask you to solve the silence. He asks you to remain in it with Him. There is a quiet strength forming when you choose not to fill the gap with panic. When you do not rush to replace silence with distraction. When you allow the unanswered to stay unanswered for now. That strength is not visible, but it is real. Some people leave prayer because silence feels like rejection. Others stay and learn something rare. God's nearness is not proven by volume. It is proven by steadiness. He is just as present when He says nothing as when He says everything. Let me gently say this. You are not doing prayer wrong. You are not being ignored. You are not praying into emptiness. You are praying into a space where God is doing quiet work. The kind that cannot be rushed. The kind that cannot be forced. The kind that lasts. So tonight, do not pressure yourself to hear something new. Let the silence be what it is. Not a problem to fix, but a place to rest. If all you can say is, God, I'm still here, that is a complete prayer. Here is your action for this night. Instead of asking, why is God silent? Gently say, God, help me stay present with you here. Then let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders soften. Let your expectations loosen. You do not need to extract meaning from this moment. You only need to remain. And remaining, especially in silence, is faith. Waiting in silence has a way of exposing what we rely on most. When answers don't come, when clarity stays distant, when heaven feels quiet longer than expected, we discover whether our faith was built on God Himself or on the outcomes we hoped He would give. That discovery is uncomfortable, but it is holy. There is a subtle shift that happens when silence lasts. At first you pray for change, then you pray for understanding. Eventually, you pray simply to stay. That final prayer is not smaller. It is deeper, because staying without certainty means your faith is no longer transactional. You are no longer saying, I trust you if you respond. You are saying, I trust you even if you don't explain. That kind of trust does not come quickly. It is learned slowly, quietly, often painfully. Here is something few people admit. Silence feels like loss of control. When God speaks clearly, you know what to do. When God answers directly, you can move. But when He is silent, movement stops. And that is where surrender becomes real. Not surrender as a concept. Surrender as a posture. Hands open. Plans loosened. Expectations softened. Many people think silence means God is inactive. But Scripture and prayer history tell us the opposite. God often works most deeply when He removes your ability to manage the process. Night prayers were never about directing God. They were about releasing control, trusting that even unseen work was still holy, still intentional, still good. Silence doesn't stop God's movement. It stops yours, so His can finally lead. There is a quiet mercy in this, because some things you are asking for cannot coexist with the version of control you are still holding. God is not delaying to frustrate you. He is making room. Let's be honest about something else. Silence can feel personal, like God chose quiet toward you. But God's silence is never selective punishment. It is universal formation. Every person who walks closely with Him will eventually walk through a season where faith must survive without feedback. That season does not mean you are doing something wrong. It often means you are being invited deeper Night is when false urgency fades. There is nothing left to prove, no one left to convince, no progress left to track, just you and God. And in that space, you are learning how to trust, without leaning on emotional confirmation. That trust is steadier, calmer, less dramatic, and far stronger. So if tonight feels quiet again, if the same prayers remain unanswered, if nothing feels different, do not assume nothing is happening. Assume something foundational is happening. God is teaching your soul how to rest, without needing constant reassurance. That lesson will serve you long after this season ends. Here is your action for this moment. Do not demand sound where God has chosen stillness. Instead, settle into the quiet and say, I do not need to understand this to remain faithful. Let that be enough tonight. Let your breathing slow. Let your striving ease. Let your trust rest. You are not abandoned in the silence. You are being taught how to walk by faith, not by answers. There is a turning point that comes quietly in long seasons of silence. Not when answers arrive, not when circumstances shift, but when your heart stops fighting the quiet. This is where many people misunderstand faith. They think faith is strongest when prayers are answered quickly. But faith often becomes purest when it learns to breathe without answers. Silence reveals something important. It shows you what you reach for when reassurance is gone. Do you reach for control? Distraction? Explanations? Or do you learn to reach for God Himself? This is not a test you signed up for. It is a formation you were invited into. Let's talk about something honest. Silence can feel like loss. Loss of clarity, loss of direction, loss of the sense that God is actively involved. But silence is not God stepping back. It is God stepping closer, without props, without constant feedback, without emotional reinforcement, just presence. Think about relationships for a moment. When two people are close, they don't need to talk constantly to feel connected. Silence doesn't threaten intimacy. It proves it. God is not afraid of quiet with you. He is not uncomfortable when you have no words left. In fact, some of the deepest trust is formed when both sides remain, even without conversation. Here is the central truth that settles the soul. God's silence is not emptiness. It is full of intention, full of shaping, full of strengthening, full of quiet alignment. You are not waiting in a vacuum. You are waiting in His presence. Many people try to escape silence by filling it. Noise, content, constant input. But silence has a purpose. It removes the illusion that faith is fueled by stimulation. It teaches the soul to rest on character, not cues. On who God is, not what He is saying right now. This is where peace begins to change. At first, you want peace from the situation. Then you begin to experience peace within it. Not because the situation improved, but because your grip loosened. That shift matters, because peace that depends on answers will always be fragile. But peace rooted in trust remains steady even when nothing moves. You may notice something else happening. Your prayers are becoming simpler, less explaining, less convincing, less bargaining, more presence, more honesty, more quiet trust. This is not spiritual decline. This is maturity. You are learning how to sit with God, not just speak at Him. There is a reason night prayer has always been sacred. Night removes urgency. You cannot fix anything at midnight. You cannot force progress at rest. The only option left is trust. And trust, when chosen freely, becomes worship. So if tonight still feels quiet, do not assume you are missing something. You may actually be right where your soul needs to be, in a place where faith no longer depends on stimulation, where trust no longer demands evidence, where presence is enough. Here is your action for this part of the night. Do not measure this season by what you hear. Measure it by what is changing inside you. Your patience, your humility, your willingness to remain without control. These are not delays. They are deepening. Before you sleep, let this settle into your breathing. I do not need constant answers to remain connected to God. Let that truth lower your shoulders. Soften your thoughts. Slow your heart. Silence is not pushing you away. It is inviting you deeper. As silence stretches, it begins to change the way you relate to God. Not dramatically, almost imperceptibly. At first, you approached prayer with expectation. Something should happen. Then with effort. Maybe if I pray differently. And now, quietly, you are approaching prayer with honesty. This is where I am. That shift matters more than you know. There is a hidden grace in long, quiet seasons. They remove the pressure to perform faith correctly. No formulas, no spiritual strategies, no right way to feel, just truth. And truth is the soil where real trust grows. Silence exposes one of the deepest human instincts, the need to be reassured constantly. We want signs, movement, confirmation, but God is teaching you something rarer: how to remain steady without reinforcement. This is not something you learn from sermons. It is learned by staying. Here is something gentle but important. God is not trying to teach you patience so you can endure more waiting. He is teaching you trust, so waiting no longer defines you. Waiting stops being the center of the story. When God becomes the center again, many people assume silence is something to escape. But silence is often where identity is clarified. When nothing external validates you, you begin to rediscover who you are before outcomes. Not as someone waiting to be proven right, not as someone defined by answered prayers, but as someone already held, already seen, already known. This is why silence can feel unsettling. It removes the familiar supports, but what replaces them is something stronger. A faith that does not collapse when feedback disappears. A peace that does not evaporate when nothing changes. A trust that does not panic when God does not explain himself. Night after night, this kind of trust is formed quietly. You show up without clarity. You stay without answers. You pray without certainty, and something in you steadies. You stop chasing reassurance. You stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios. You stop trying to control what belongs to God. Not because you don't care, but because you trust. This is not the end of your prayers. It is the deepening of them. You are no longer praying to force movement. You are praying to remain connected. And connection matters more than timing. Here is your action for this part of the night. Notice where you are gripping the outcome. Not to shame yourself, but to gently loosen your hold. You might whisper, "God, I release what I've been trying to manage." Then let the silence remain. Not as emptiness, but as space. Space where trust settles. Space where peace grows roots. You are not stalled. You are being strengthened in ways noise never could. And when this season passes, you will not just have answers. You will have depth. Something else is happening beneath the silence now. Your soul is slowing down, not because the questions disappeared, but because they no longer control you the way they once did. At the beginning of this season, silence felt threatening. Now it feels instructive, still uncomfortable, but less frightening. That is growth. There is a difference between waiting anxiously and waiting attentively. Anxious waiting scans the horizon constantly. Attentive waiting stays present. You are beginning to wait attentively. You still care, you still hope, but you are no longer frantic. And that matters more than visible progress. One of the quiet lies silence exposes is this: if God doesn't speak soon, I will fall apart. But here you are, still standing, still praying, still breathing. The silence did not destroy you. It steadied you. That alone tells you something about God's faithfulness. Night prayer changes when silence stays. It becomes less about requests, and more about release. You stop listing everything that needs fixing and start handing over what you cannot carry. This is not spiritual fatigue. This is spiritual trust maturing. Let's name something clearly. God's silence is not asking you to become indifferent. It is asking you to become anchored. Anchored hearts are not numb. They are stable. They feel deeply without being ruled by emotion. And stability is exactly what God builds before movement. There is a reason many answers come after seasons like this. Not because God waited to respond, but because you needed to be steady enough to receive the answer without losing peace. Some blessings arrive quietly. Others arrive with responsibility. Silence prepares you for both. You may notice now that your prayers are shorter, not because faith is shrinking, but because trust no longer needs explanation. A simple, "God, I'm here," carries more depth than long, anxious words. God does not require volume to hear you. He responds to posture. Silence also teaches discernment. You are learning the difference between urgency and importance. Not everything that feels urgent deserves your energy. Not every thought deserves your attention. This is wisdom being formed in real time. Here is something deeply reassuring. You are not wasting nights by praying into quiet. Every night you choose presence over panic, trust over control, rest over rumination. You are building something unseen but lasting. Faith that can endure uncertainty is faith that will not collapse under pressure. The world teaches you to react immediately. God teaches you to remain. Remaining is harder than reacting, but it produces something reaction never could: peace with roots. So tonight, as silence continues, let it be what it is. Not an enemy, not a punishment, not a void, but a classroom. A place where God teaches your heart how to stay grounded without constant reassurance. Here is your action for this part of the night. When the urge to overthink returns, do not argue with it. Simply pause and say, "I do not need to solve this tonight." Then breathe. Let the night do what it was designed to do. Rest does not mean giving up. It means trusting that God is still active, even when you are still. And that trust is becoming stronger than you realize. You are reaching the quiet edge of this season now. Not the end of waiting, but the place where waiting no longer defines you. There is a difference. Earlier, the silence felt heavy. Now it feels held, still unanswered, still unresolved, but no longer threatening. That shift did not come from circumstances changing. It came from you being steadied. This is where many people misunderstand God's work. They think transformation happens when the answer arrives. But often, transformation happens when the heart is no longer ruled by the need for the answer. You are not indifferent now. You are grounded. And grounded people can carry answers without losing peace. Notice what silence has quietly taken from you. The panic, the frantic replaying, the constant need to check if something shifted. You still care, but you are no longer consumed. That is not emotional numbness. That is spiritual strength. There is a maturity that only grows in unanswered seasons. It looks like trusting God without rehearsing arguments, like resting without guarantees, like believing without updates. This kind of faith is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply stays. God is not impressed by dramatic faith. He is pleased by enduring faith. Faith that remains when nothing confirms it. Faith that keeps choosing presence over pressure. Faith that says, "I don't need proof tonight to trust you." There is something else happening now. You are learning to let God carry the weight of outcomes. Not because you stopped hoping, but because you stopped trying to manage what only He can move. This is where peace becomes durable. Peace that survives uncertainty. Peace that does not collapse when silence continues. Many people never reach this place. They leave prayer the moment silence stretches too long. But you stayed. Not perfectly, not confidently, but faithfully. And that matters, because staying reshapes you. You are closer now, not necessarily to answers, but to rest. The kind of rest that does not depend on resolution. The kind of rest that trusts God's character more than timing. Here is your action for this part of the night. Let yourself acknowledge the strength that has grown quietly in you. Not pride, just gratitude. You might whisper, "God, thank you for holding me here." Then let the silence remain. Not as something to endure, but as something that has already done important work. You are not waiting alone. You are not forgotten in the quiet. You are being prepared, gently, patiently, faithfully. And the God who has held you through the silence will be faithful beyond it. As this night reaches its deepest quiet, nothing more is required of you. No clarity, no understanding, no emotional resolution, only trust. This is where silence completes its work. You came into this night praying, not because everything was clear, but because you refused to stop showing up. You stayed when answers didn't come. You listened when nothing was said. You rested even though the questions remained. That is faith in its purest form. Not loud, not dramatic, but faithful. Here is the truth that settles the soul at the end of waiting. God was never silent because he was distant. He was quiet because he was close. Close enough to steady you. Close enough to carry what you released. Close enough to work without explanation. And he has been with you the entire time. You do not need to carry this night into tomorrow. You do not need to solve what God is already holding. The silence has done what it needed to do. It softened you. It grounded you. It taught you how to trust without leaning on proof. That lesson will remain with you long after this season changes. So let this be the final movement of your heart tonight. Not a long prayer, not a request, just a quiet declaration of trust. God, I rest in you. I release what I cannot control. I trust you even here. Amen. Now let the night be what it was always meant to be, a place of rest, a place of release, a place where you stop striving and allow God to keep watch. Nothing is lost. Nothing is forgotten. Nothing is out of his care. Be still. You are held.